folks, who we have with us is Christopher McCurdy. He's a political commentator in Jamaica, Western Jamaica, of course, the Montego Bay. When they talk about the Montego Bay, the Westmoreland, St. Elizabeth, anything Western Jamaica, this is the man you should be in contact with for the conversation. But today, the point of view on us with us today on the Caribbean Connection is to talk about the Cuba, Jamaica, the medical mission that is on the voice of every Jamaican today. And of course, we have been knowing about this Cuban mission from in the 60s, the late 60s into the 70s, took a break in the 80s for some reason or another, and then it go back in full force in the 90s leading up to today. And 2023, that contract was need to renegotiate it, and there was some issues goes on. So we have Christopher McCurdy to open up our eyes and to tell us. Chris, welcome to WAVS. Take it away.
Greetings, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate the connection.
Right. So Chris, we hear it today in Jamaica that the Cubans are pulling out of Jamaica. And when I say the Cubans, we're talking about the Cuban medical practitioners, because there is some geopolitical stuff going on in the world today, and we all know about that. What is the real reason why the Cuban mission for the medical is on their way out of Jamaica in short order?
Well, it doesn't get any realer than the press release that the government released earlier. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade released a press release out here that basically outlined the position of the government. And Marty, I don't speak on behalf of the government. I'm not a member of the government or the cabinet. So I'm speaking from my observation based on what's out in the public space.
Right.
It appears that the Cuban medical mission has long been utilized by the Cuban government as one of their options for economic development. And as you know, I think all of us are aware of the global geopolitics that exists today. And Cuba is no stranger to that sort of geopolitical tension. If we dated back from way back in the 1970s when we had the Cold War era, and a matter of fact, where we are today is coming directly from that. So the position of the Cubans is that the...
Are you there?
Caribbean nation,
Uh-huh.
they will hold firm to that arrangement. And I think the Jamaican government, who has an obligation to international treaty and a different arrangement globally, unlike Cuba, we are signatories to certain protocols globally that we have to follow. And I think if we are to just look at it a little deeper, it is obvious that the conditions on which the Cuban medical professionals work in Jamaica is not in line or in sync
with international standards.
Global. Right. And as such, Jamaica being a signatory to some of these treaties and international arrangements cannot afford to be, out of touch with those realities.
Exactly.
I can understand the government of Cuba has to do what they have to do in light of the global embargo that they would have faced since the 1970s.
Well, Chris,
but that's a decision that they have to make on their own.
Okay, good. And I'm glad you touched that in reference to the embargo has been plaguing Cuba for over 60-something years or more. So what would you say to someone that Cuba is under embargo, and we and the Cubans now have to use their medical team, their education, their education, the engineering? Those are those basic infrastructure that they have to export so they can gain money to feed the Cuban people. What do you have to say to that?
Well, there's nothing wrong with exporting labor. Nothing is wrong with that. If it runs directly in line with what we refer to as our farmer program.
Right.
The difference is our farmer program facilitates employment for local Jamaicans, both in Canada and in the United States.
Right.
the condition on which those persons are offered employment is totally different
Versus
from
what going on with the Cubans in Jamaica.
exactly.
So in other,
Having full control
of
of
their
the
passport.
workers' salary, their movement, their
Right.
passport, that is tantamount to
modern day slavery.
Yeah.
And I want to mention this because I don't know if a lot of people know when I read that when I dive into how the Cuban mission in Jamaica, they were actually told for them to even drive a motor vehicle in Jamaica, they have to get permission.
And that's what I'm saying to you, that is forced labor. And when you look at it, and I make no mistake about it, I don't think there's an issue with the Cuban medical professionals. I doubt there is. There is none at all. The issue, and there's no issue with the treatment on the job either.
Correct.
Where accommodation is concerned, leave entitlement, the freedom of movement in Jamaica.
Right.
All of these stuff, there's no issue with it at the local level.
But it's,
the problem reveals two issues which requires immediate action, according to the Jamaican government press release.
right.
Among the concerns they identified were the fact that Cuban professionals were not in possession of their own passport.
Right.
Right? Once that was brought to the attention of the government of Jamaica, immediate steps were taken to correct that. The issue was raised with the passport immigration agencies in Jamaica,
Right.
and that needed to be taken care of. However, the government also discovered that salaries payments for Cuban medical personnel were calculated
at a low rate.
At the same level.
At the same level as Jamaican people.
At the same level as the Jamaican, yes, as their Jamaican counterpart.
But they weren't getting that money. Majority of the money was going back to Cuba.
Absolutely. And that amount of money amounts to billions of Jamaican dollars.
Over $5 billion US dollars. Over $5 billion US dollars.
Going into the coffers
of the Cuban government.
Into the coffers of the Cuban government. And I think to prop up, to use people to finance the government at that level, I think it's wrong.
Okay.
And I think Jamaica was very timely in ending that relationship with the Cuban government.
Well, so Chris, so how to say to the people of Jamaica, like a lot of us, because over 3 million Jamaicans over the years, we always look at Cuba as a resourceful country to assist Jamaica. Because when we think about Cuba, we think about the Osemarty Secondary School out there in Twickenham Park. It's now a high school. But back in my days, it's somewhere that I would have gone to get a teeth pull. When they talk about where the police academy is actually located, the Cubans were there doing agriculture back in the early days until the Ministry of Agriculture take over that property. And they talk about GC Foster College. So the question is that I have to ask you, Jamaicans have benefited from the Cuban mission, but we have benefited from the sweats and the backs of the Cuban practitioners.
And that is the truth of the matter. Also, we have to put in context those things that you have named just now, which is the Hosematis and the other institutions that were constructed by, quote-unquote, the Cuban government. We must put that into context, because if you are aware or afraid with the situation that existed back in the 1970s, you would have known that Cuba, a country that has been isolated from the rest of the world, would not have the resources to make those kind of contributions to Jamaica. So we have to look wider afield and look at where the Russians, at the time the USSR, would have positioned themselves using Cuba as merely a proxy to get into this side of the world. Correct. And that is the real reality. So a lot of what Cuba has done for us back then weren't really by Cuba. It was financed by USSR. And
correct,
that's just the fact.
Correct. And that's a fact. I mean, but the truth of the matter, and people may hear we having this conversation now, and this conversation about the geopolitical situation that is presently, especially in the Caribbean, because as you hear, as we all know, theology anymore. This is about the people's life in Jamaica and about the people's life in Cuba, because at the end of the day, the truth of the matter, and I hear the argument out there, if it was one political party in office, this would have gone in the next direction. And I strongly believe, without doubt, no shadow of a doubt in my mind, that any party that was in office today in Jamaica would have to take the same stance. What do you have to say about that?
I'm very cautious in going that road with you. And why? Because history is on my side. There are two political parties in Jamaica. And when one of the two was presented with a similar scenario back in the 1970s, they chose to stuck the middle finger to the United States. It is the same political party that exists today. So I'm saying to you, Garfield, that if the roles were reversed today and the other party was in office right now, I could not say without a doubt that they would not take the same position they have taken in the past. There's no reason for me to think that they would not. Why? Because if you study the history of the 1970s, the position Jamaica is in today is exactly the same position we were in back in the 1970s. We had a choice to choose to side with the West, and we went with our friends all the way out in the USSR.
Okay, well,
and we know how that ended up.
So
I don't need to tell anybody how that ended up.
No, we knew, but at this political time, though, the geopolitics of it today, no, Chris, is a total different time from in the 70s to today, because, Chris, by a snap of a finger, things can change at this time. Information moves so fast that we basically is doing what is right, and I believe the government of Jamaica has stood by what is right, because by taking such action today is by basically determining how the roads can continue to be fixed in Jamaica and maintained. It is taking action today by basically how things can be done, how the remittance can flow back into Jamaica. Just think about it. If something were to change and $100 is now gone onto a plane ticket, do you know what the impact of tourism in Jamaica will be?
Well, that would wipe us out, because I think persons would have better options than cheaper options.
Exactly.
And there are several other tactics that the United States could use as part of their foreign policy mechanism. What I will say to you, my brother, is that I am not confident that had it been another political party ruling Jamaica today, that they would have taken the same position as this government. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that simply because they have proven themselves in the past. And let me tell you, my brother, back in the 70s, the position was even worse. It was more dire. There were missiles pointing at other countries. This was a hostile situation. At least we are nowhere near the level of hostility today compared to what existed back in the 1970s. And if at that time, when the level of political tension was 10 times higher than it is today, we took that decision then. Can you imagine now, with Jamaica's economy doing much better, our debt to GDP is lower, we are in a better space globally. Can you imagine, with that sort of strength behind us, what we would have done?
Well, Chris, I will tell you, I believe good sense would have been prevailed. I believe that I have not heard anything differently from the opposition, that the government should not take the stance that they have taken. What I'm hearing from the mass of the people is how we are going to replace the Cuban doctors when they are finally out. And let us make it clear, the doctors are still in Jamaica, the eye missions are still going on, but there will be a period of time when the doctors and the mission will be gone back to Cuba. But as we know, I've heard Dr. Christopher Tufton has put in alternative plans that they are bringing in new mission, different people from different countries to fill the gap. And I believe I heard him said the ministries and the agencies are now dispatching doctors from across the length and breadth of Jamaica to fit the shortfall of where the incoming doctors need to be and all of that. So at least the government has an alternative plan, and we just have to work with that. And again, if you are a medical professional and you are retired anywhere in the world and you can get home back to Jamaica, this is one of the opportunity that people in the diaspora can go back and give a helpful hand, a lending hand to our home country, Jamaica. Christopher, are you a doctor?
No, I'm not.
I guess you're not a doctor, so you cannot help at Cornwall Regional Hospital. But again, Chris, it's great avenue, and the conversation again is good, and I love it because at the end of the day, Cuba is 90 miles from us. The Cuban people must have a good life to live. The Jamaicans must have a good life to live too. And again, the only aim of a government is to make sure he or she is keeping his people safe and keeping his people up and living at all costs, regardless what's going on, and they must make sure they make the right decision so the people can benefit. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that is where we ought to be looking now. I will say to you in closing that the government of Jamaica, would have extended themselves to the Cuban and wanted certain things to be agreed upon. The Jamaican government currently, they pay the Cuban government. The Cuban government then pay the nurses and doctors. The United States and other countries say the workers receive only a part of the salary.
Right.
And the Cuban state keep the rest of it. The Jamaican government wanted an arrangement where the workers are paid directly, and the Cuban government did not agree to that. Also, what the government of Jamaica wanted was a system where the program complies with Jamaica's labor law and international convention. As I said to you earlier when I started, Jamaica is a signatory to several international conventions.
Correct.
And we can afford to be in breach of those conventions just simply because we want to support a country that is wedded to a political ideology.
There you have it, Chris. Chris, we got to leave it right there. Next week, same time, we're going to bring you back on the program because this conversation must continue, and we have a lot more to talk about the geopolitics and how Jamaica can benefit. Christopher McCurdy out of Western Jamaica. You have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.